Hello and welcome to this new episode of Hands-on SAP Dev with me, Marius. This episode is a special one as we won't focus on SAP technology, but SAP technology will be the backdrop and we'll focus on something else. GitHub Copilot. It's a cool new project that basically enables an AI to code with you. So the AI will make suggestions while you write your code that you can accept or decline. And the idea is that you write better code, that you have to jump off your code editor less often to, for example, Google something, and that the pair programmer can assist you in these things. I've put my name on the waitlist of this project, and I was lucky enough to have a chance to test it for a few days now. And I want to show you what I found out during these few days of doing SAP development with GitHub Copilot. As you might guess, I only tested it for a few days, so I'm sure the service will improve in the future. I'm sure I haven't figured out all the details yet, so I'd ask you to take everything that you see and listen from now on with a grain of salt. And spoiler, I don't think GitHub Copilot will take over your job, at least not in the near future. Okay, have fun with this video. Okay, so let's dive right in. So here you see the website of the GitHub Copilot, which is, according to GitHub, your AI pair programmer. You see it's still in a technical preview, so services might change. Obviously, they're still working on it. And you also see the promise that Copilot offers to you. So you start writing your code, for example, here in TypeScript, you start with an import statement, you write the signature of your function, and you basically say this function is an async function that returns a Boolean and has the name is positive and gets a text as an input. And what Copilot does is like it figures out that it has to return a Boolean, that it somehow has to find out if the input value is positive in whatever that means, and that you imported fetch. So you probably want to use fetch for a request in here as well. So basically the suggestion that Copilot gives you is that it sends a request to an API for sentiment analysis, and then it returns you if the label positive is assigned to it. Obviously, we use, or this example includes TypeScript, but you could also use Go, Python, Ruby, and a bunch of other programming languages. If you scroll further down, you see this is powered by OpenAI for the machine learning part. It extends your editor, whereas currently there's an extension for VS Code, and it also supports GitHub code spaces. I mean, I guess we'll see what else will be supported in the future. And they say it's more than just autocomplete. I think we've seen that in the example that it actually provides you content depending on the name of the function. So if you look at this example here, it says average runtime in seconds. You pass in a few runs. Also from the context, it knows what a run is, that it has time, and it basically calculates the average time of each run. Or you use or name the function days between, insert 2 days, 2 dates, and then it returns a number of days between these dates. And if you go through the site, you see multiple examples how you could use it, basically and you see that it also includes the comments. So it really, the Copilot knows around the surroundings of your file and applies that to whatever it suggests. And also let's skip over this part. If you're interested, I recommend that you read this page, have a look at the examples that are about the generic examples, and later in the video you will see SAP BTP development specific examples. But one cool thing that I want to show you in the end here is basically that it also can help you when you're not sure about the API. So basically you say fetch tweets from user and you don't know the right API call. What is the URL of this API? This is something where Copilot can help you as well. So it can basically help you to read the documentation less. That's probably enough that you know that it works and that it is in the documentation. And then you could hope that Copilot will be able to tell you what a proper coding is. And here you see a little bit about how it works, some frequently asked questions in case you are unsure where the data is coming from. Surprise, it's from GitHub. But if you're concerned what happens with your data, is your code, will it remain private? For all these questions, I recommend that you check out the FAQ down here. Okay, with that, I would say let's jump to the coding part. So first, let's switch over to VS Code here. You see down there that I have the Copilot extension already installed. It's currently deactive, but I can click on it and then you will see when it's active and how it will work. Oh, and one more thing, in case you wonder how you can use or get access to this technical preview, there is this sign up button on the bottom and all the way on top of the page. So when you click on it, you basically get redirected to a form. And here you basically see that my account is already enabled and that I can use it. So going back to VS Code, I would say let's start with a cat project. So I open a terminal here, and then I just create a new cat project that I'm sure you already know the command. I say call as bookshop, and I add samples and mta. And this should basically create a new folder called bookshop that already includes some sample data and the basic setup of a project. If you've used cat before, this is no news to you. It takes a moment or two, and then you see my bookshop is showing up here. Also with the mta.yaml file, the DB folder, the server folder, everything that you'd expect. So let's have a look at the mta.yaml file, which is a core part of every BTP development. So this is very, very SAP specific, or not even just SAP, it's SAP BTP specific. And here you see that there are modules, there are some parameters, and if I just say, oh, let's include a new command here. So I just hit dash to get one suggestion. And here basically you already see that it suggests me to run npm build, which is, if you know the project, yeah, you wouldn't do that. It's okay. It's not like a suggestion that's totally off, but it doesn't really apply to what most people would do here. Similar when you go to modules and you go down there to the level where you say, okay, from here I could actually create a new module. It really suggests me, okay, do you want to create a new module with the name bookshop SRV MQ for messaging queue? Well, that's interesting. Let's try that out. And in the next property, it would suggest me type MQ and a path to it. And you get suggestions, but you know, this is some like kind of random autocomplete. It is not 100% wrong, but what you cannot expect of the Copilot is that it will magically just show you, oh, you want to add a DB folder. It's not an LSP that actually knows about the logic that you might want to use. So it really just gives you some suggestions based on what other people used in their MTA projects. So let's forget about that now here. Let's have a look at something that's more like using non-SAP technology, such as the package.json, which is actually included in every Node.js application. So let's say there wasn't a description in a repository, and if I go down here and I ask for something, it basically tells me, oh, you want to add a description? And actually, the description is not bad. So let's just take that one, and let's say you want to add another dependency. You know there is a dependency that is related to SAP CDS, but you forgot the name. But you would expect that many other applications that have the CDS dependency also have the dependency that you are looking for. So you could just go on a new line and see, oh, it suggests me to add UI5 as a dependency. But you could also like hit Option and opening bracket to go through all suggestions that Copilot makes. So let's say I accept it. So with the tab key, I can accept a destination and suggestion, hit comma, and then go to the next line. What else does it suggest? Oh, I added UI5. Maybe I want to add UI5 core. And again here with tab, I could accept it, and with option and bracket, I could have a look at all the suggestions that it's currently making for me. And it's really cool that this is not only the suggestion, it's not only based on the file that I can currently open, that I have opened, but also on the position. So if I go down there in the next line and I say, oh, what dependency could I use that is related to Express? It would suggest, oh, do you want to use jQuery? And currently, okay, I try to see other suggestions, so this is the only one that I currently got here. Or if you say, what else could I use but SQLite 3? TypeScript, yeah, that also makes sense to have it as a dev dependency. Or what start script could there be? So this is the first time I'm trying this, so let's see, does it suggest another script that just has a name? Or, oh, it actually suggests CDS build, so it somehow knows that I previously have CDS run as a start script. So if you have CDS run as a start script, yeah, I guess it makes sense to have CDS build as the build script here. So this is already, like, I would say, really useful, especially if you know what you want to do, but you don't know the exact command. So let's say I want to add a new command and call it deploy. And I want to see what's the deploy command in the CDS world. So you saw that I added deploy. VS Code automatically added the quote here. And if your cursor is not on the rightmost position of the line, I found out that it's not offering you any suggestions. So basically, I should not see a suggestion until I add one more keystroke now. So let's add a colon and see what happens. Oh, cool. So it actually suggests CDS deploy. In reality, you would know that maybe you want to add another property here. I'm not sure if actually it does. So it also offers me, do you want to run deploy with the production flag, for example? But as it's AI, let's try something mean and say, so there is no CDS test A command, but let's just try to do test A and see if it just copies whatever value here. So it does not simply suggest CDS test A, but it actually suggests CDS test, and then it adds test A in the environment variable, which is, yeah, I could see some people using it, but maybe it's not the most useful suggestion. But anyway, I would say this is already very helpful if you operate in the package.json file. Let's have a look at the hub-specific files here. So usually this is the file where you define the data model, and there's already one entity defined, books. And this entity has 3 properties. And if I hit the new line, it suggests me a new property, price. I guess price could be a property of books, but actually you see, because I also have the tooling for CAP applications installed on VS Code, it's not accepting double here. So basically, this is because double is not a valid type in CAP. So the suggestion for the entity or for the property was okay, but actually the type of the property is not valid. So that basically tells me that the Copilot knows what an entity is, it knows what properties are, it knows what data types are, but it doesn't know much about the valid data types in CDS files for core data services. Let's try to add another entity. So if I just go in a new line, it suggests, do you want to add an entity bookshop, which is the name of the project, but let's say I want to add an entity authors. So it suggests me one with author, but actually I want to have author S for plural. And then it still gets that right, that I should start with a curly bracket here. And when I go to a new line, it says, oh, do you want to add a key that is of type integer? Same as before. I would say, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's try that. I go to the next line, a name, it makes sense that authors have a name. That's also a good suggestion. And then it says, let's close that for now, that entity. That's actually would be good, but let's say I want to add more properties. So I go to the next line. It would still suggest me the closing bracket, which, yeah, it's not a really useful like hint or suggestion here because it would actually make the file invalid. And if I go in a new line between the two current properties, it just suggests me to add the same line again that I have here. And then obviously the language server protocol would say, oh, this cannot be right to have two properties of the same name. So let's remove that again. So I think overall, I would say for for CDS files, similar to for the mta.yaml file, there are some suggestions that I can understand why the AI makes them, but they're maybe not the best suggestions, and you might be better off just to develop on your own, especially because sometimes it suggests properties that are not valid in this specific language. Let's go to something more generic again, the bookshop file here. So basically when you go back here, let's say we add a new properties. Let's take the price one that it suggested before. Let's say we only have integer prices here. And then we add price as well and say the price here is 25 for the first book. And let's say for the second book, it suggests me 17. So yeah, let's just accept 17. Why not? And then if I go in a new line, it basically it kind of suggests a new record, It at least knows that the ID should be different, but for the rest, it just repeats the value from the first record. So I accept it. I have a second book with the same title. If I go to a new line, you guessed it, it basically just says ID 4, but other than that, same record again. Which is, yeah, that can take some work of you, but I guess there's better ways to generate random data for like testing, for example. Next, let's have a look at the server part of our CUP application. Over here on the left side, you see the server folder, which already comes with a cat-service.cds file for us that actually exposes this books entity as an OData service. So in here, let's see how the Copilot can support us. So first, let's try to annotate the service that we are exposing here. So if I select annotate, you saw that LSP already jumped in and helped us to create a new annotation. But actually, I don't want to use the LSP. I want to use just the Copilot. So if I say annotate my.books with, okay, that's already good. And then it suggests authors, publisher, category, price, book ID, and close. Oh, and it suggests to close it. You notice that it kind of makes sense, like all the properties that were suggested, but actually these are not really valid in our case here. So a valid annotation, for example, might be the modified add odata.e tag. So that's actually what we might want to do. So that didn't work out with the Copilot so far, but let's say we want to have the same annotation for our second entity. So once again, we say annotate my.authors this time with, and let's see if the suggestion is better. You see, basically Copilot suggests that I use the same property from up here. Similarly, when I say, okay, add read-only, it already suggests me, hey, do you want to expose the same authors in the same way that you expose books, which is actually really cool. But let's say if I say I actually don't want to read only, but I also want to enable write access, It kind of works here as well, but I use the help of the LSP to add the authors. Because usually, from my earlier experiments, I found out that Copilot is kind of smart, but you have to support it a little bit, especially for CDS files. And you can trigger it easily. So if I say entity, let's just call them orders, it will also suggest me to expose the entity orders, which does not exist. But Copilot recognizes the pattern from the lines above, and it helps me to complete the code, which can be maybe exactly what you want, but you shouldn't rely on that. Every code suggestion that you get is like makes sense and will help you for your project. So let's remove this line here again. And now we come to the part where I expect Copilot to be very supportive when we create a custom code that is associated to our catalog service. So for that, we say cat-service.js, for example. And here we can just write vanilla JavaScript code. And as I already said, I expected Copilot can help us a lot here because basically we can make use of any like JavaScript code that is already or has been taught to the AI. To do that, let's use the library that you might be familiar with, Axios, and just say require Axios. So you see Copilot tells me here to import this library. For our actual custom coding, we want to fetch business partners from SAP Graph. So for that, we just need to define a function, async function. We don't want to call it get cats or get categories, but get business partner. And it would actually expect an ID, which makes sense. And it would send a request to /API/business partner. And when we go through the available options, we basically can choose the same function here that has a try-catch clause around it. But let's say we don't want to have it, and let's copy it, or let's accept this suggestion from our Copilot here. And then we see that there is a URL that is predefined, but this is not really the URL of the business partner from SAP Graph. So let's have a look at the SAP Graph Explorer. And let's say here, this is the URL. So if I insert an ID and I run it, I get a business partner back. So let's copy this ID and go back to VS Code and just drop this URL here. And now we actually send a request to the right destination. And let's make an annotation or a comment here. Check if this is correct. Like, nice idea from Copilot. And let's say we also want to get the cost centers from the SAP Graph. So once again, async function get cost center. And let's see what it suggests. So it also still suggests to add an ID. It would basically use the same implementation from above. But here now, this might not be the correct URL. It basically just replaced business partner with cost center. It did it in a smart way. So the first occurrence, it only used the lowercase version of this word. And here it used camel case, same as what I used in the function name. And that's also why I added a comment, because that's really useful, because now I have the same comment already in this new function, and it might help me to find this, or to spot this mistake. So I know what errors the Copilot might be prone for, and then I could like adapt this to my working style. Okay, let's add a third function that follows the same pattern. Let's call this async function get product, for example. And here, obviously, Copilot will follow the same pattern. And now I can come up with another function that might use products. Let's say I call this function get price difference. Okay, it would accept an ID, which is obviously not really what we want. Let's call this get price difference between products. So basically, this makes sense. So it accepts product 1, product 2, and it returns the price difference of both products. And actually, if I say I want to have get an absolute value so that it's never negative, let's say, also a funny suggestion, get price difference between business partners. Yeah, this is not really what we want, but let's get an absolute price difference between products, and it actually returns math.apps, and then it returns the result of the previous operation. So this can be really useful, especially let's say you're new to JavaScript and you might not know that the absolute function is or has the name math.abs. And for that, it can be a really useful tool to use the Copilot to just describe what you want. And if you see, oh, that's kind of what you want, but not really, you just make the function name a little bit longer, and then it works as well. So obviously, this is a very easy operation that you could write manually, just as probably in the same time as you define a function name that describes what you want to do. But let's say you want to come up with an estimate. So you're in a prototyping phase and you don't care if the computation is 100% correct. You just want to get from A to B really fast. So let's say I want to have a function to convert euro to USD. So let's see what options the Copilot gives us. So we could either choose the exchange rate 1.16, 1.19. Okay, right now it only offers these two, but let's say I remove one letter and do it again. So you see this time I have another exchange rate. This is something I haven't quite figured out yet. So when you get which suggestions, I think it's probably just a matter of luck. And then if you continue typing, and let's say I want to have another function, I just type F. It basically already suggests the reverse operation for me to convert USD to euro. So basically here, I accept the name, I also accept this implementation, and then I get basically a different exchange rate, which kind of depends on the exchange rate I selected up here, but you would also see that if I type it here shortly in the calculator that you can see 1.16 times 0.88. So this is not really the opposite exchange rate. So whenever I convert a euro amount to USD and use the other function to convert it back, it doesn't give me the same number back. So this is really, you should use that with a grain of salt, but I think it's still fun to see how the AI assistant tries to help us here. And obviously you could use that for any type of function. So if you just type function and describe what you want it to do, it would do that for you, which I think is really cool. It probably remains to be seen how useful that be in your everyday job when you're coding, but it's definitely fun. And that was only for CAP projects. Let's try the same for an SAP UI5 project. To do this, let's just use ECUI5 to create a project for us. It doesn't have to be a very complex project, so I would say for now, I just take the minimal project that ECUI5 offers me. So here I say create a new project. This time it should be an SAP UI5 project with the default names. And then you see that the project has already been created here and the files are still are already there, but now it's executing npm install, which is something we don't have to wait for. So let's start right away, close all the old files and go to our web app folder. And here we see the index.html file, which is, as you can imagine, if you want to add additional meta tags, this is something that Copilot is very strong in knowing different tags that you might want to use. So obviously this is not very SAP specific, and therefore I expect that suggestions are very good. But let's say we come to the manifest.json file. This is something more SAP specific, right? So let's say we want to add a new property to the SAP app here. So let's go under ID, and it would suggest a type, which is actually not a type that we actually want to use here. It would suggest application version, which is also a property that is valid in the place, but Copilot doesn't recognize that there is already an application version and that there can be only one application version. So let's say if we were to accept this, it would also suggest some random version 1, 2, 3, and it would suggest us to close it. But now actually we have a duplicate key problem here, and this is something JSON specific. So I think this is something where Copilot is not yet perfect, but at least we learned that Copilot is aware, or at least has a notion of which properties are available and could be used. Similar when we say there are obviously more properties, there's SAP UI, which we already defined, but let's say if we minimize this here, we minimize this, and we go down here, let's see what else it might suggest. So SAP UI View, SAP UI Core, actually these are libraries, so these are not proper values. But what would be a proper value? Let's say it would be sap.cloud, and here to have an SAP ID, an endpoint, libs. I mean, I could like just randomly accept all these suggestions, but as you might have noticed, these are not valid. So I just accepted whatever Copilot suggested to me, but this is also here not yet the best suggestion that it could have offered to me. Let's say we want to have a look at the view. So let's try what Copilot offers for us here in the view. It kind of adds a useful tag, but the problem here is that it adds this M prefix, which is actually not what we need here. And let's say we prefer to have a closing tag as well. Note that this closing tag here has been added by the LSP or by the support of the Fiori tools and not by Copilot. If it would have been added by Copilot or suggested, I would have had to accept it first. So let's go to the next line. It offers us to close the content tag, which is a little bit strange because actually we already have one below. So let's say we want to add a list. It suggests a list to us with a select property that to be honest, I'm not sure if this property exists, but let's just take it anyway. And let's say here it suggests a list item and another list item and another list item. And then it says, okay, you could close the list here, which also, if you might know, list item itself is not a real SAP UI5 tag. Standard list item would be one, and then we would have a description here that says, for example, ABC. And then obviously we close the standard list item. And if we remove these lines and go to the next line, we at least saw that Copilot learns really fast. So it probably always makes sense if you're doing SAP development to not use it for projects that you start from the scratch, but maybe that you enable it when there is already a code base that Copilot could learn from and apply patterns that it sees in your code. Okay, the last thing that I want to show you here is when you work on your controller. And I think here Copilot can be very useful. So you see, this is the part here where we could define our implementation of the controller. So, and if I just go here, it already suggests me to add an onInit function, which is, if you know OpenUI5 development and SAP UI5 development, something that you most likely will need. So I just take this onInit function and it suggests me to add a placeholder for our actual implementation and to close it again, which is a very good suggestion actually. Let's say I want to add another function. There is the onExit event hook. That's good. And what else does it offer? On before rendering, also something that is very specific to SAP UI5 and OpenUI5 projects. And I think this, I don't know, but I expect that these suggestions are so good because there are more SAP UI5 and OpenUI5 projects available on GitHub compared to CAP projects or other SAP development projects, for example. But that's just more reason for us to put open source projects out on GitHub when they use SAP technology, right? So let's accept this one as well. Obviously, it will suggest the same placeholder. Let's try something different, something that I haven't used before. So let's hope it works. So let's see. So if I remove this import part of the SAP UI define and also the function definition, because let's say I want to add so the first thing it does, it basically suggests me to add the same part that I just removed back in. But let's say I want to import a different library. So I add a comma here, and it basically suggests, oh, do you want to import JSON model? And this is a valid path here. So that's actually a really good suggestion. And in the next suggestion, it suggests that I add this function definition, the function header back. And this time, both libraries are, or both imports are used. But let's say I want to add a third import. Let's say JSView. Okay, I don't mind. And let's go to the next line. And here, once again, it does a really good job in helping us to autocomplete in a meaningful way. There are some things that I need to fix, so such as the name of the controller. And in here, basically, it just complains that the value has never been read, but this is something that's still valid JavaScript code. It's just a warning for me, basically. And another thing that might be really useful for web applications is, for example, you want to convert color from hex to decimal. So let's just use functions or Copilot in a similar way as we did before, by just providing a name of the function and leave the implementation up to Copilot. So let's say convert hex to RGBA. And there goes our implementation. Honestly, I'm not sure. I haven't tested it if this is 100% the right implementation, but I would assume so. So let's say it's at least better than what I would have been able to implement out of my head. And if I go to the next line, it probably, it suggests on after rendering. I would have expected that it suggests convert RGBA to hex, but maybe that would be the next suggestion then. Let's try that out. Okay, no, it doesn't. But if I say convert, now if I just provide some input, then it would be able to redo this conversion, which is in this case actually only RGB. So let's change that to RGBA, to hex. And let's wait a second for the suggested implementation and let's accept it right away. But obviously this is something that is very generic, so it's not SAP UI5 or OpenUI5 specific. Let's try to do an on button press, which is really an event handler that you might use in your OpenUI5 application, and see what implementations Copilot suggests here. Oh, it just suggests do something, which is okay, not really helpful, but I guess it suggested because we used it so often up here. So let's maybe remove that part here just to avoid confusion of the Copilot and try it again. And this time you see it actually knows much about SAP UI5 development. So it knows that each controller can access the view with get view, and each view has access to a model. maybe not always, but in most cases, if you want to access a default model, this is how you would do it. And then you can get the data, and let's say it gets the color property of the data from the model. No, it actually gets a color property from the button press event and sets it and writes that one to our model. This implementation, I agree, might not be really what you want to do, but I found it very interesting that basically the Copilot knows what models are, how to interact with models, how to get values from a button press event. So this get source and get color would basically give us the color property of the button depending on what button it is. If it's a default button, I don't think there is a color property. So this code is not 100% perfect, but again, really interesting and fun to use, especially if you kind of have an understanding how AI works and that you can imagine what work the AI does in the background here. Really interesting. And let's say we do something. I have a cheat sheet down here that we could use, for example, for other functions that might be typical to UI5 applications. So let's say there is a search box and we want to have an on-search function. So what implementation does it suggest this time? So here it basically, again, gets the model and also gets the data from the model and basically adds a property to this model with the name search that has the value of the parameter value of this event. So this is something that might be actually working out of the box if you have a view with a text field and that text field fires the onSearch function. So in that case, this implementation would be actually really good. Okay, so this was all that I want to show you about GitHub Copilot. I hope I was able to excite you. We saw things that already work good, things that don't work as good, like I found out a couple of times the native tooling that was using a language server protocol was conflicting with GitHub Copilot. We saw that Copilot is not yet very strong with very domain-specific files, such as the mta.yaml or the manifest.json of UI5 applications. It was really okay for like regular files, such as the CSV file, where it suggested us to add new records with new IDs. It also worked really great when we used custom coding, for example, to convert currencies or also to interact with OpenUI5 artifacts such as models and views to add event listeners. So Copilot really proved that it was already aware of the type of project that we're currently in. You can tweak it here and there as a developer, I guess. For example, when you add Copilot in an existing project where it already can learn from existing patterns in that file or in the same project, I guess all of us can make Copilot collectively better by putting more SAP-related projects on GitHub to foster the open source spirit and to largen the knowledge base of this AI. And overall, I'm just really excited about this project and the future that is coming for it. So if you are excited as well, put your name on the waitlist, wait until you are accepted, install it in VS Code, and use it for your next SAP development project. See you. Bye.